It was 1859. Just a few years after the first War of Independence, British rule over India was shaky. The rebellion had been put down, but questions remained. So Queen Victoria sent a new officer to India, someone to put the house in order, especially the finances. His name was James Wilson. Back then, he was a British MP in the House of Commons, but when Victoria asked him, he resigned and he set sail for India. And once here, he got down to business. Wilson's job was to create a new tax regime in India, also to try and introduce a paper currency. So in 1860, he presented a budget. Don't think of it as the budgets of today. This was much smaller, but Wilson did make a big change. He introduced income tax collection. If you earn more than 200 rupees, you had to pay taxes. That was the rule. Wilson had a lot of ideas in the pipeline. But the same year he passed away in Kolkata, lots of rumors surround his last words. Apparently he said, "Take care of my income tax." And that's what happened. Budgets became a feature of India. We continued it even after independence. Of course, it's undergone many changes. Today's budget is very different from the colonial ones. But where did it all start? When did governments start preparing budgets? Time for a flashback. The word budget is relatively new, but the practice is pretty old, dating back to ancient empires like the Egyptians and the Babylonians. I mean, they had to. Ancient Egypt is often called a command economy. So the pharaoh controlled everything, the grain supply, the barter system, the canals, all of it. So a budget was necessary. Same for the Romans. Their vast empire also needed a budget. In 150 CE, the Romans had a lot of income, some 12,000 kilograms of gold, also 6,000 kilos of silver. And where did this income come from? Mostly wars and tributes. But Rome's budget was not always this good. Around 60 BC, it was in crisis. Too much debt, too little income, so the Roman economy was sinking. Then came Julius Caesar. He brought more fiscal responsibility to Rome. His successors introduced income tax. That's how Rome balanced its books. Indian empires also had budgets. Like the Mauryan dynasty, their revenue system was based on Kautilya's Arthashastra. You had things like a common tax regime, routine crop collection, even a common currency system. It was introduced by Chandragupta Maurya. When Ashoka came to power, trade was growing, more infrastructure was needed. So much like today, allocations were made. Some money was set aside for building roads, some was set aside for waterways, and successive empires perfected this. Like the Mughals, Akbar had an excellent fiscal policy. You could say he had no choice. The Mughal Empire was among the largest in the world. It made up 20% of global GDP back then, so you needed fiscal discipline. Taxes were not uniform. It was a bit progressive. What you paid depended on your land. Productive land equaled more taxes. Less productive land equaled less taxes. Now, all these examples tell the same story. Budgets have been around for a long, long time, even before money came into existence. Just two differences, though. It wasn't as sophisticated as it is today. It was also never a single document presented on a single day. It was a combination of many policies. And when did that change? Over a period of many centuries. In 1689, a revolution swept across Britain, the Glorious Revolution. Soon, the monarchy lost its supremacy. The parliament took over that position, so the king or prime minister could not spend as they wished. They needed the parliament's approval. But this was rudimentary. Parliament's control only extended to military affairs, like how much money would soldiers get or how much money should the navy get. And the logic was quite simple. The king should not be able to raise an army against parliament. So the military budget was controlled. The rest would follow gradually. Around the 18th century, ministers of the crown would carry their expenditure plans to parliament. And how would they carry them? In a large leather bag. Initially, this bag was called the budget. Not the papers inside. It came from the Latin word bulga. From bulga came the French word bougette, which means a bag or pouch. And from bougette came budget. Robert Walpole started this trend. He was the first Prime Minister of Britain. He started calling the expenditure discussions opening of the budget. This was way back in 1733. By the year 1800, it became the norm. Budget came to be universally accepted. It still wasn't a single-day event. The British budget was a patchwork, a little bit here, a little bit there, basically a bunch of different expenditures and policies that would only change in the coming decades. Meanwhile, the French caught on, especially Napoleon. He wanted more control over the French military. And what's the best way to do that? To control the funding. In 1803, the French adopted the English word budget. It went on to be refined and expanded. By the 1860s, it was France's most important policy document. Officials were now writing down everything, expenses, revenue, accounts of each department. Everything was compiled into a single document. Across the Channel, the Brits were impressed. In 1861, they set up the Public Accounts Committee. In 1866, the Auditor General's office was set up, so budgets kept getting more refined, and England and France were colonial powers. What they did at home, they took abroad. So the colonies also got budgets. You can see a different experience in the United States, though. In 1790, Alexander Hamilton submitted an informal budget to the US House. Hamilton was America's first Treasury Secretary. His budget was called a Report on Public Credit. A formal budget would come much later. It took more than a century. After 1911, some US states and cities adopted budget laws. So the next step was obvious, a formal national budget. It finally happened in 1921. The Budget and Accounting Act was passed. It put the US president in charge. He or she must plan and prepare the budget. Who gets what? Which department needs more money? Which department needs a cut? All of that is decided by the president. The budgets we see today evolved in the last century. And a couple of reasons for that. One was the Great Depression, a period of financial decline and crisis in the 1930s. It was like a wake-up call. Governments realized that free market alone is not enough. There has to be intervention. Some sectors may have to be prioritized. And how do you do that? With budgets. Secondly, budgets have become populist tools. Want to announce a big bang policy? Use the budget. Want to reform or open up your economy? Again, use the budget. It became a gauge for government policy. India's budget has undergone many changes. After independence, the first one was presented in November 1947 by this man, R.K. Shanmugam Chetty. He served as the Diwan of Kochi, but Chetty resigned in 1948, so the next few budgets were presented by John Mathai, an economist from Kerala. And since then, we've had a long list of budgets. Of course, some of them stand out. Like the 1991 reform budget, it opened up the Indian economy to the outside world. Or the 1997 Dream Budget, which reformed India's tax regime. Or the 2000 Millennium Budget, which pushed India into the 21st century. Each government has left its mark on this process, including the current one. In 2017, the railway and union budgets were merged. Until then, they were separate. In 2021, the budget documents were gone. In their place came a tablet. The idea was to avoid too much contact during COVID. So the budget keeps evolving. It took centuries for the current form to emerge, this single-day long speech format.
Honorable Speaker.
But in a way, we are also going back. The budget still gives you important fiscal indicators like growth projections or deficit target or fund allocations. But a lot of work is now done outside the budget, much like it was done centuries ago. So I guess it's a process that will keep evolving based on need, time, and context. On the show today, the T20 World Cup bandwagon has moved across to the West Indies. What can you expect from this?
Hello, I'm Alison Green, coming to you from Durban, South Africa. Today we have a special show.
Let's start with a report on India's shifting nuclear posture. For the first time since India officially became a nuclear power.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Aaron Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.